why do we do science? While everyone has their own unique reasons, motivation for many scientists and researchers comes from a desire to understand ourselves and our world, to discover and generate new knowledge, and to use those discoveries to make positive change. In order to achieve that, we need to build a society where everyone has the opportunity to contribute to science, to learn from the history of science, and to work with new discoveries. Through inclusive and accessible science communication, we can help science get into the brains of everyone who wants to learn and use it, and we can inspire individuals of all backgrounds and identities to join the next generation of scientists. This talk will be divided into 3 sections. In the first and largest section, we'll discuss what to communicate, using inclusive language and explaining scientific concepts for a public audience. The second section will focus on where to share your communications to maximize your reach. The third section will focus on formatting these different types of communications to be accessible for people with disabilities and engaging for individuals with varying learning and thinking styles. The talk will be about 45 minutes and an open question period will follow. Let's get started with what to communicate. I'm based in Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, and many of you are as well. This area is unceded Indigenous land, meaning that the land was never transferred from Indigenous to settler control through a treaty or agreement. The Kanien'kehá:ka are recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters. I encourage you to visit resources such as native-land.ca to learn more about the past and present of the land that you occupy. And integrate acknowledgement of the land where you are or where you did your research into your communications. But just learning about and acknowledging the land isn't enough. As we discuss science communication today, it's important to consider the effects that colonialism has on the way that science is done and shared, particularly in academic and research institutions. For example, Indigenous knowledge is often orally transmitted. Consider how settler or Western science approaches are connected with the focus on structured written journal articles that is prevalent in many academic and research institutions. Throughout our discussion today and after this talk, I encourage you to reflect on how your way of generating and sharing knowledge might uphold oppressive colonial systems and what you can do in your science communication and beyond to contribute to reconciliation, equity, and justice. There is a wealth of resources available to support continued learning and action, such as the Reconciling Ways of Knowing Forum at waysofknowingforum.ca, the Indigenous Ways of Knowing Learning module from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, resources from the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation at nctr.ca, the Northwest Science Writers Association series of events on decolonizing science communication, and the Indigenous Peoples Language Guide from the University of British Columbia. This document shares practices to ensure that respectful and accurate terminology is used when referring to Indigenous peoples. For example, the use of the plural peoples provides recognition of multiple distinct communities. The use of respectful, accurate, and inclusive language is crucial when referring to all identities and demographic characteristics. There are situations where it's very important to refer to identities and demographics in science communication. When sharing research findings, it's crucial to make reference to who the research was done with, such as the demographics of a participant group, and who it can impact. For example, If a study collected and reported sex, gender, race, age, and other demographic and identity factors in their participants, and reported any results related to those factors, that's crucial to share. That allows consumers of your content to assess whether people like them were included and how the results can relate to them. In contrast, if a clinical trial was done only on a sample of white men aged 40 to 50, for example, or if demographics aren't reported at all, that's also very important to share because those results can't be generalized to individuals of all races, genders, and ages. And the public needs to know that. You might also share research focused on a specific group. For example, neurodivergent individuals or a subgroup such as dyslexic individuals, or people with a particular mental health condition. In all of these cases, proper language is key. A second situation where inclusive identity-related language is key is in individual interactions. For example, if you're introducing a speaker, interviewing a researcher for an article or a podcast, or writing a social media post about someone else's research and you acknowledge that. With these situations in mind, let's look at some guidelines for inclusive language. The most important concept to keep in mind is to always refer to people using the terms that they identify with. Don't make an assumption about someone's identity or make a decision on how to refer to an individual or group without consulting them. In cases where reference is at an individual level, like a speaker introduction, invite them, if they would like, to share their pronouns, affiliations, and identities in the terms that best suit them in that context. Other times, reference is done at a group level, like if you're sharing the results of a study comparing different groups. In these cases, take a look at the terminology used in the study, but be critical. Did they specify where any of the language choices came from? For example, did it come from an analysis of terms provided by participants or a credible resource developed by individuals who identify in the associated group? Did they include any statement acknowledging any variation in identity terms among the study participants? Keep in mind that just because a term was published in a research paper, particularly if it's not recent, does not mean it's the way that people want to be referred to today. It doesn't mean it's up to date. Consider the ideas that I'll present in the rest of this section to help you evaluate the terminology in the studies you're sharing and make adjustments as needed in your communications. The first is make sure to appropriately differentiate between sex and gender. Sex refers to biological characteristics and is generally assigned at birth based on physical features such as chromosomes and reproductive organs. Intersex, male and female, are terms used to describe sex. Humans, non-human animals, and cells all have a sex. Gender is a social construct related to roles, behaviors, and relationships. This includes gender identity, which refers to a person's inner concept of themselves as relates to gender. Woman, man, non-binary, transgender, cisgender, two-spirit, genderqueer, and third gender are among the many terms that individuals might use to describe their gender identity. An individual's pronouns, such as she, her, he, him, they, them, or something else, are connected with gender identity. While we can engage in communications with other people about their gender identity, we can't communicate with non-human animals to determine how they identify. So terms related to gender identity should only be used when referring to humans. Particularly in older research, but still today, the terms sex and gender are often used interchangeably, and this is not at all correct. make sure to double check whether the research you're sharing collected information related to sex, gender, or both, and use the appropriate terms for each in your communications. And in situations where statement of a specific sex or gender identity is not necessary, aim for gender inclusive language. For example, starting a presentation with "Welcome everyone" is more inclusive than "Hey guys." The next guideline is particularly related to discussions of disability, neurodiversity, and health conditions. Be conscious of the difference between identity first and person first language. Identity first language states the identity before the person. Examples of identity first language include disabled person or blind person. Person first language uses the reverse order in the form of person with or person who is or has. Examples of person first language include person with a disability or person who is blind. Identity first language is growing in use in many communities, but there is no objective right or wrong for everyone. Individuals and communities differ in which they use, and it's important to always use the language used by the person or community being referred to. When communicating research related to disability and or neurodiversity, consider using the language that the majority of participants in the study use, if that information is available. And if this is relevant for your research, this is information that you should be collecting from your participants. Also include a statement of how the language choice was made and acknowledge in the communication if there is variation in which language is used among participants and others with shared identities. In addition, don't use language like "suffers from" that inappropriately makes an assumption about quality of life. And terms like differently abled or special needs are becoming much less accepted. Words such as disability, neurodivergent, and the names of particular identities or conditions can be an important source of pride, strength, and community. So use these words if they're used by the people being referred to. The next guideline is be mindful of the use of the word preference. Someone's identity is the way they are, not a preference. The term preference implies choice. For example, I prefer chocolate ice cream to vanilla, but if only vanilla is available, it's okay. That's a preference. But someone's pronouns are not preferred. They are their pronouns. I use she, her pronouns, but if someone uses other pronouns to refer to me, it's not okay because they're giving me a label that I don't identify with. And that's not a preference. So note that some individuals may use multiple pronouns. Similarly, use the terms romantic orientation and sexual orientation. And note those aren't the same thing. Don't say things like sexual preference. Again, it is not a preference. And a concept that I personally work with quite a lot is cognitive diversity, variation in how we perceive and process information. This includes discussion on personality, like introversion, extroversion, and thinking styles, like big picture or detail-oriented thinking. In this context as well, it's important to be very mindful of the use of the word preference. Saying, I have a preference for introversion implies a choice, which is not at all accurate. It's not a choice. Saying I have an inclination, tendency, or disposition for introversion would be more accurate. The importance of considering inclusion doesn't stop at language. It's also important to use visuals that represent the diversity in science and research. Look at this image collection. It features 5 images of people who present as white men in wet labs working alone. If this is all that's shown on a social media profile or website, think about the message it gives. How can using only these images harm both current scientists that don't look like the people in the photos and also potential future scientists who want to see people who look like them successful in science and know that they can do it too? Look at the second image collection on the right. These 5 images show people with diverse identities related to race, gender, disability, age, and more. It shows different types of research environments, types of work, and ways of working, such as wet lab experiments, data visualization, and computer work, as well as independent and collaborative work. Note that this is not a suggestion to just stick stock photos of individuals who appear different from each other on your communication and think that's all that needs to be done. This is a reminder that representation matters. Be mindful of who's getting the cover photos in your stories and whether the chosen photos are actually representative of the research team and the type of work being discussed. Use your platform to amplify the work of researchers with a range of identities and areas of expertise. Use your inclusive language and visuals to share a message that's engaging and valuable for your audience. Consider inclusion in your messaging. In many cases, your audience is public and includes individuals with education and experience in many different fields. It's important to focus your communication on what's in it for them. Why should they care about this work? What impacts will it have? I'm not going to go too deep into how to determine that message, as that would be a whole other session, but I want to emphasize the importance of considering equity and inclusion in your main message. Let's say, for example, you're researching a treatment for a neurological condition. We know that there are major inequities in the healthcare system. So besides just saying that this work will lead to a new treatment, expand on how it can address inequities. Will it be more affordable for patients than current treatment? Is it easier to ship to remote communities? Is it the first treatment for that condition that's been explicitly tested for differences in efficacy or side effects between individuals of different gender identities or different racial or ethnic backgrounds? When you have your message, the next step is sharing it in a way that's easy to understand for individuals from different fields. Real stories, fictional scenarios, and analogies are great ways to build understanding. Make sure that these are inclusive. For example, using an analogy related to 90s North American TV shows would likely work well with an audience of millennials who grew up in North America, but would be much more challenging to understand for other age groups or people who grew up in other parts of the world. And if you're creating a fictional scenario, be mindful of names and pronouns. Ask a few people to read it and see how they imagine the characters to see if there are any concerns about stereotypes or lack of representation. And last, watch your use of scientific terminology that people with experience in other fields may not have been exposed to before. Balance plain language with clear explanations of a few scientific concepts. Aim to use plain language for the vast majority of your communication. For example, instead of hippocampus, you could say a brain area responsible for memory. But in certain cases, particularly in a longer presentation or written piece, you can use the opportunity to share and explain a few scientific terms so that audience members are familiar with them if they encounter them in the future. For example, use the term magnetic resonance imaging and show a photo of an MRI machine. Briefly describe what it does in plain language and show an example of an output image. Or use the term p-value and illustrate it with a simple example like coin flipping. This type of information can go a long way in helping someone understand a medical procedure, assess the meaning of a statistic they see in the media, and build interest in continuing to learn about science. Use your platform as a science communicator to demonstrate anti-racism, anti-oppression. Share research on racism in healthcare. Share studies and stories on racism and all forms of oppression and inequity in science and research. When you do this, be mindful of trauma and include content warnings and resources for support like crisis lines where appropriate. Amplify content focused on anti-racist and anti-oppression actions and show how you and your team are taking action. And when you do this, use accurate language. Say racism, say colonialism, and say white supremacy. An important step in addressing these issues is calling them what they are. Make sure to avoid harmful metaphors in your communications, like whitelist and blacklist. You could say allow list and deny list instead. And avoid any culturally appropriative terms. For example, your journal club is not a powwow. It's a meeting, a discussion, or a networking activity, perhaps. And your research group is not a tribe. Perhaps it's a team, a work group, or a group of colleagues. What we just touched on is just a foundation of inclusive language and content. There's so much more to learn and so many more resources available. So here's a few to get started. The American Psychological Association's Bias-Free Language Guidelines. This is an incredibly comprehensive resource that covers many different aspects of identity. The Indigenous Peoples Language Guide from the University of British Columbia that I mentioned earlier. The Racial Equity Tools resources. Neurodiversity, some basic terms and definitions written by Dr. Nick Walker. Training modules on sex and gender in health research from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. The Disability Language Style Guide from the National Center on Disability and Journalism. And the GLAD Media Reference Guide focused on language related to the LGBTQ community. Keep in mind that language evolves. Some terms used years ago are no longer acceptable, and some terms are being reclaimed. It's important to revisit these concepts and stay up to date with evolving best practices in inclusive language. Let's move on to the second section. In this section, I'll provide an overview of the wealth of communication channels out there to share research. Much of the research conducted in an academic setting is shared through journal articles. Other conventional academic forms of research dissemination include theses, textbooks, or other books targeted to an academic or scientific audience, as well as academic conferences or seminars. These are really important ways to share your research. But keep in mind that the audience for them is often primarily people affiliated with academic or research institutions. There are so many people who want to learn and would benefit from learning about science and research, but don't have access to these communications for reasons such as journal paywalls, conference fees, or not being on an institutional mailing list to receive seminar promotion. Expand your reach by combining these conventional academic forms of knowledge sharing with other methods at the institutional, public, and individual levels. That can start with other opportunities offered within the academic and research institutions. Connect with the communications professionals in your research institute, department, or university to discuss sharing your work in institutional newsletters, online publications, press releases, or social media. Participate in 3-minute thesis or similar pitch events. These provide great practice in explaining your work to a public audience and often provide public recordings that you can share after. Share your research, your data, and your code through open science repositories, including institutional ones and public ones like GitHub. Participate in outreach initiatives to bring scientist-led teaching to schools and community organizations. Leverage existing public media sources to get your work out to a wider audience. Reach out to news sites, TV, or radio channels to see if they're interested in covering your work. Attend public networking events. Present at public and non-academic events like Pint of Science, awareness or fundraising events, industry-focused conferences, and many more. Contribute to online discussions on forums or social media. Be a podcast guest or write for a blog or a website. And create your own communication channels. Have your own science communication focused accounts on various social media platforms. Create a new blog, podcast, video series, website, or something else to fill a gap in any existing communication channels. Use these channels to share your research and also others' research and opinion pieces. And last, build direct communication channels with individuals and groups related to your work. An often overlooked but highly valuable communication method is direct reach outs. Initiate a conversation with clinicians, advocacy groups, investors, community organizations, and others relevant to your field of work. Set up meetings with them to share your work and other relevant research. Work with them to create a research summary brochure to be distributed in a healthcare or community center, for example. And stay open to new connections and communication channels as the space is continually evolving and new opportunities are forming. In this last section, we'll discuss how to format different types of content so that they're accessible for people with disabilities and engaging for individuals with varying learning and thinking styles. Consider accessibility in your choice of journals and other publications. Look at a journal's or publisher's accessibility information online. Ask them directly what they'll do to ensure your article is accessible, and check that the provided actions have actually been implemented in their recently published work. Consider submitting to an open access journal, as this reduces barriers related to paywall and also often reduces the number of steps someone has to go through to get to the content. This increases accessibility as well. The same concept applies to any publications, like websites, blogs, or podcasts, as well as events like conferences. Before making your contributions, ask the hosts how they make their content inclusive and accessible. Use this information to choose where you submit, present, and contribute. Present information in multiple ways. Some individuals cannot access information presented in one or more modalities, such as video or audio. Some individuals find it easier to learn from, focus on, and understand certain modalities and types of communication. One example of different ways to present information is to use text and visuals. For example, writing out results and complementing this with a graph, or writing out methods and complementing this with a diagram, flowchart, or video demonstration. Make sure that the information you're providing can be accessed using multiple modalities like audio and written text. Make sure that presentations, videos, and podcasts have captions or transcripts. Some individuals, myself included, find it much easier to stay focused, remember, and understand information in a podcast or other audio communications if we can also follow along with captions or a written transcript. And offer interactive ways to engage with the content, such as a game, or for in-person events, something tactile like a brain model. Sign language interpretation, Braille, and captions or transcripts in multiple languages provide additional accessibility. Even when restrictions are lifted, continue to offer remote participation options in complement to in-person participation. In addition to giving information, multiple modalities are also important for obtaining, collecting information. If you have a comment section on a post, an invitation to provide feedback or ask questions, or a contact page, make sure that different options are given for people to add to the content or to reach you. For example, inviting questions during a virtual session through speaking or using the chat. Next up, we have a few tips for accessible text content. First, use headings to structure your content. Format them using heading styles and appropriate HTML tags, and make sure to go in order. The title is heading 1, subtitles under it are heading 2, and so on. Headings allow easy scanning for the content a reader is looking for, and proper tagging is important so that assistive technology such as screen readers can identify what's a heading. Make sure that all text is big enough to read easily. This depends on the medium, but at least 12 point or 16 pixel is a good place to start. In cases like in-person presentations where people are looking at your slides from farther away, bigger may be needed. Sans serif fonts, meaning fonts without the decorative lines at the end of strokes, like Arial, Verdana, or Calibri, are generally more accessible than serif fonts. Ensure sufficient contrast between text and background color. This means that there's enough difference between the colors so the text pops out enough to read it easily. Very dark gray text on a very light gray background, as I've been using in my slides, is an example of sufficient contrast. Lighter gray on the same background doesn't have the same contrast, doesn't have sufficient contrast, and is much harder to read. You can check contrast online, search for WebAIM contrast checker. If there are links in your text, make sure that the link text says where it goes, not something vague like click here or learn more. Visit our contact page to send feedback with link in contact page is more accessible than click here to send feedback. Screen reader users can choose to listen to a list of links, and a click here out of context would be impossible to interpret. Also ensure that links are formatted differently using a characteristic other than color. Underlines work well. If you're including hashtags in your content, use camel case. In camel case, each word starts with a capital letter and other letters are lowercase. This makes it easier to determine separation between words. Next up, a few tips for accessible visuals. There must be a text description available for all images in web content, social media posts, and any other communications. For images that convey a relatively simple message, use alternative or alt text. For example, alt text for this image could be a hand with dark red nail polish holding a small clear tube that contains 5 yellow dandelions in water. Alt text should provide the information needed for a screen reader user to be able to visualize an accurate version of the image. Aim to be as succinct as possible and don't include anything that you wouldn't expect a sighted user to obtain from the image. But what if we have a more complex image, which we very often do in science communication, like a figure, graph, or chart? Here's a pie chart showing a completely fictional data set of preferred ice cream flavors in a sample of 1,000 Canadian adults. 25% of respondents prefer strawberry, as shown by the solid pink section. 25% prefer mint chocolate, shown by the green and brown dotted section. And 50% prefer vanilla, shown by the gray section with X's. Let's look at how accessibility practices are integrated in this figure. It has a title that states what the figure shows. Each section is directly labeled with the flavor and the percent of respondents. This prevents individuals from needing to refer back and forth with a legend or having to estimate the percentages based on how a slice looks. The fill in each section has both color and texture differences, and sections are separated by bold lines. In general, avoid using color as the only means of conveying information, as this can be challenging to interpret for individuals who are colorblind. Make sure that information can be obtained using other aspects of the figure as well, like patterns as we see here. For different types of figures, you may want to use color and shape to differentiate different data points, or dotted lines to distinguish different data sets in a line plot. For complex figures, the alt text can be an overall description of the type of chart and what it shows. For example, here, a pie chart showing the preferred ice cream flavors among 1,000 Canadian adults. Then, below the figure, add or link to a longer detailed description. In this case, it could be an overview statement and a table of flavors with their associated percentages. Depending on the type of chart, the longer description can include a data table, description of the visual presentation, and main findings or patterns. For presentations, live and virtual, all of the tips for accessible text and visuals apply. In addition, make sure to provide live captioning, as we've done here today, as well as captioning or a transcript for any video or audio recordings. Captions provide the visual text to show what the speaker is saying in real time, and they'll often appear above or below a slide or at the bottom of a video feed. A few more tips for accessible presentations. Share an agenda or outline at the start of your presentations and show it again as a progress marker between sections to help participants follow where you are in the presentation. Use slide titles that provide the main message or the topic for that slide. Keep animations simple, like appear and disappear. Avoid any visuals that flash or flicker, as they can induce seizures, and avoid any visuals that can induce dizziness, like simultaneous animations going in different directions. Be mindful of your pace and make sure to set up your space and equipment so that your speech transmits at a sufficient volume, including the use of microphones if needed. The points we just discussed provide a foundation of knowledge to help increase the accessibility of your science communication. But this isn't everything, and there's so much more to learn. Here are a few resources to get started. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from the Web Accessibility Initiative, the Accessibility Project, written as A11Y. The 11 stands for the 11 letters between A and Y in accessibility. The Inclusive Design for Social Media resource from Hootsuite. How to Make Your Presentations Accessible to All by the Web Accessibility Initiative, and the DataViz Accessibility Resource List on GitHub. That wraps up our talk. Please feel free to get in touch anytime if you have any feedback about the talk, any questions, or would like to discuss further about any of the topics that we discussed today. You can feel free to reach out to me via my website, FeliciaKarpati.com. That's spelled FALISHAKARPATI.com. Or feel free to reach out by email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. I'll now take questions. And please feel free to either raise your hand on Zoom to indicate you want to ask a question verbally, or you can write your questions in the chat.